Hello everybody and welcome, or welcome back if you're one of my lovely subscribers. Today I want to talk about second chances, or at least one such instance in which an artist managed to not just crawl his way back to relevancy, but kick down the door and establish his star all over again. It's not often that an artist gets a second chance at cultural relevance. Sure, they might get a new breath of life when an older piece of work becomes popular again. For instance, the resurgence of Kate Bush thanks to Stranger Things, and the Nirvana song Something in the Way getting a second chance to shine a la the new Batman movie.
Something's in my ass.
Sometimes an old work will get sampled or reused in a new way, bringing it either back into the cultural zeitgeist or introducing it for the first time, depending on the age of the people experiencing it. But it's very rare. I'd say unusual. Perhaps even against the natural order, that an artist will have their time in the spotlight and then generations later skyrocket to relevance once again. You could even call it supernatural. Today, we explore the curious comeback of Carlos Santana. The year is 1999, the last year before the new millennium, and also the last year anyone was happy. As far as music went, this is the same year we got songs such as No Scrubs by TLC, Baby One More Time by Britney Spears, Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Richer, Livin' La Vida Loca by Ricky Martin, and a slew of other 90s classics, including one that actually fits the bill of an older song that got a new lease on life.
Tell me the world is gone.
The rock sounded like pop, and the pop sounded poppier. This isn't exactly the musical climate you'd expect a 51-year-old guitarist from Mexico who hadn't had a charting hit since 1985, and even then barely cracked the top 50, to suddenly dominate the summer pop charts and once again become a household name, not just for the older generation who remembered his glory days, but for the youth as well. The guitarist, as you know, he clicked on this video, is Carlos Santana. To fully appreciate what's happened here, let's start at the beginning. Carlos Humberto Santana Barragan, I probably pronounced that right, was born July 20th, 1947 in, Autlan de Navarro, Mexico? I don't know how to pronounce any of these things. At age 5, he learned to play violin from his father, who was a professional violinist. At age 8, he traded in the violin for a guitar, which he also learned from his father. He was inspired by the American rock and roll and blues music of artists like B.B. King, Ray Charles, Little Richard. I mean, aren't we all? But one of his favorites was Ritchie Valens. You might know him from his hit, La Bamba. At this time, there were very few Mexican artists in the world of rock and roll, so, as you can imagine, a young Santana found great inspiration in Mr. Valens. In 1955, the family moved from
Autlan de Navarro
to Tijuana, the border city between Mexico and California, and would learn his craft while performing in Tijuana strip clubs as a teenager. Tijuana strip clubs. Oh, clubs on the Tijuana strip. That's a big difference. Sorry, y'all. I should read these scripts before I start filming. And then not long after that, his family moved and settled in San Francisco, California. In 1966, he formed the Santana Blues Band. As you can imagine, living in San Francisco during the mid to late 60s while having a love for electric guitar blues was fairly advantageous for Mr. Santana, as he became exposed to all sorts of music and ideas due to the growing hippie movement. Folk, jazz, psychedelia, you name it. The landscape for what was acceptable in popular music was vastly expanding, To quote the man himself, "The 60s were a leap in human consciousness. Mahatma Gandhi, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Che Guevara, Mother Teresa. They led a revolution of consciousness. The Beatles, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix created revolution and evolution themes. The music was like Dali, with many colors and revolutionary ways. The youth of today must go there to find themselves." Now, it could have been easy for a young up-and-coming blues guitarist to just simply get lost in all of this noise, if not for the fact that Carlos still had something new to bring to the table. Blending the modern techniques of rock, blues, psychedelic, distorted guitar solos, meandering melodies with the rhythmic energies of his Latin roots quickly caught people's attention. And the band would have a pretty strong following around the San Francisco club circuit almost immediately. In 1969, they were signed to Columbia Records and hit the studio to record their first album, the self-titled Santana. Before that debut album was even able to release, however, Santana would snag a career-changing gig at a little concert you may have heard of, Woodstock. Here too, they turned heads as nobody else sounded quite like them. And if you were a hippie baked out of your gourd dancing to the energies of the universe, I can imagine a blend of Latin-infused rock, jazz, blues, salsa, and African rhythms probably would have been a damn good time. The event basically brought Santana into the public consciousness overnight, and by the time that debut album did land, it shot all the way up to number 4 on the US Billboard 200, which is pretty great. And this success would continue as the next 2 albums from Santana would hit number 1. In fact, while chart position may have varied, every album the band put out in the 70s would hit at least gold status in the US, often even hitting platinum status, sometimes double platinum. So, where did it all go wrong? The first sign of trouble was the release of Beyond Appearances in 1985, the first album from Carlos Santana to not hit gold certification, and the trend would continue. Now, is this because the music was bad? Yeah, a little. Thanks to pressure from the label to produce radio-friendly commercial hits, Beyond Appearances does that thing that so many classic rock icons did in the 80s, where music is just overproduced, and there's that tasteless amount of unnecessary reverb just slathered over every instrument. Clapton did this on Behind the Sun. Here's Bob Dylan doing it.
I ain't never gonna be the same again.
Bob Seger.
We saw the lights on the horizon.
The list goes on. It was just a thing old rockers ended up doing throughout the 80s, and I'm not sure why. So having heard those, here's the opening to Breaking Out, the lead-off track to Beyond Appearances. Fits, don't it? It sounds very much like a musician from the 60s trying to make an 80s song sound 80s enough. The biggest crime that this album commits is that it absolutely buries any and all personality from Santana's guitar. Carlos Santana is a legend because his tone and style are iconic. They're one of the most instantly recognizable in rock music. It's why people fell in love with him in the first place. Nobody sounded like him. Nobody could sound like him. Here's a short snip of the guitar solo from that same song, Breaking Out. Listen to this. Did that sound anything like Carlos Santana? That could have been anybody. Literally anybody. When an artist trades out what made them unique to begin with in order to chase a modern sound in an attempt to stay relevant, that is the first nail in the coffin to guaranteed relevancy. If you haven't listened to this album, I'd suggest checking it out, if not only to be shocked a little by how just soulless it sounds. Compared to his other work, it is pretty bewildering. And really, the trend continued. Sales basically plummeted from here on out. Each release sounded like it was trapped in its time period, with as little of what made Santana Santana as possible. So, older fans had no reason to stick around, and newer audiences had a plethora of new emerging and more exciting acts to give their attention to. In 1992, the band released Milagro, their 17th studio album, and while I don't think it's amazing or anything, it is actually kind of a return to form. I don't imagine it would be anyone's favorite, but it ain't bad. But I suppose it was too little, too late, and the album flopped anyway. Santana continued to tour, but there were no plans for any future albums. Years passed, and eventually he found himself without even a recording label. Though to be fair, he left his label. They didn't boot him. Stating that he had a masterpiece album in him and didn't think that Island was the right label for him to accomplish that. Which is pretty savage, but damn does it feel good to know he was right. He did manage to get signed by Arista Records, thanks to former colleague Clive Davis, who worked with Santana at Columbia Records. And it was he that suggested Santana make a star-studded collaborative album featuring younger and more popular artists of the day. This is something that fascinates me, because I'm not sure anything quite like this has happened before in the music industry. We've seen the consequences of when an aging artist compromises their sound to appeal to modern sensibilities. That's what led us to this downfall to begin with. But what was happening here was that the new generation of music makers were kind of taking center stage. They were doing the heavy lifting while Santana would accompany them. He'd allow them to shine while also offering his own talents to elevate the music to Santana status. Has any other performer done this? Allowed themselves to sit back seat on their own album? Like, features are a thing. I see features all the time. That's great. But like, where the main artist is like more of a spice added to the dish than the dish itself? It's honestly genius, because you completely avoid the trap of trying to sound modern, because the music actually just gets to be modern, and he just gets to add his own little flair to it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this has happened before. At least not to this level of success. Comment below and let me know if you know any other examples of this strategy, because I do not. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that Santana had limited creative input or anything other than just play guitar good. That's not the case at all. I just think it's funny that Smooth might be the most popular Rob Thomas ever was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The idea for this album was to have half of it be vintage Santana, the old classic Carlos style we were all used to from his hits like Oye Como Va, with the other half being a natural blending of contemporary influences that Carlos himself was into. In fact, he found contacting these artists for potential collaboration one of the more exciting parts of putting the album together. And honestly, I think it shows. I can hardly believe the Santana on this album is the same one on Beyond Appearances. He is energized. Every lick from him is dripping with passion and personality. As much as I love his earlier work, I dare say Supernatural, at least at that point, was his absolute best work. I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, because I feel like the song Smooth, being its first single and also being like an immediate big hit, got so overplayed that it's practically reached meme status. And I think perhaps that's what people think of when they think of this album. So maybe not everyone takes it like very seriously as a good Santana album, but I implore you to go back and give this album a listen from start to finish. It is just so damn good. The guitar work is glorious. You don't even have to, whatever. You don't like Rob Thomas, you don't like Everclear, whatever. Forget it. Don't worry about them. Don't worry about lyrics. Just listen to the guitar work. Listen to what this dude is doing on the axe. You can tell Carlos feels invigorated. He's having lots of fun, and it's just impossible to ignore. And the results speak for themselves. Supernatural debuted at 19 on the US Billboard 200, but quickly shot up to #1. His first album to hit #1 since Santana 3 in 1971, which actually set a Guinness World Record for the longest gap between #1 albums at 28 years. After 4 albums straight of not even achieving gold status over the last 17 years, Supernatural would hit diamond status in the United States, 15 times platinum in fact. Diamond status is 10 times platinum, so diamond doesn't quite describe it. 15 diamond plus an extra 5,000. Diamond status in Canada, 4 times platinum in Australia, 4 times platinum in Switzerland, 4 times platinum in New Zealand, double platinum in Austria, France, Netherlands, United Kingdom, and single platinum in Sweden. God damn. This album was a global phenomenon. Not only was it the best-selling Santana album, it's one of the best-selling albums of all time. And it is the best-selling album by a Hispanic artist with over 30 million sales worldwide. Now, as far as the critical reception, there were a handful of detractors who complained that the album didn't have much of a coherent identity, what with all the featured guest artists, but reception was mostly positive. In fact, Supernatural would go on to dominate the 2000 Grammys with 9 wins, including Album of the Year. It's such a bizarre story that an artist that was already successful and had left their legacy cemented in the annals of rock history would turn out not to hit their true peak until about 3 decades later. And the man is still rocking today. One of the reasons I even thought to do this video was because I hadn't checked him out in a while. Went to listen to his latest offering, which at that time was Africa Speaks. And I just couldn't believe the quality of it. This album's incredible. I'll link to some of my favorite songs down below. I feel like so many of Santana's contemporaries from the 60s and 70s barely do anything anymore. And yet Santana hasn't lost a step. If anything, he's gotten better with age, and he's just running circles around these guys. Guitarists that we still revere as guitar gods because of their work decades ago, while Santana is still, to this day, just as stellar as he ever was. Let me throw it to you guys. Did you listen to Santana post his Phoenix-like rise in the 90s? Did you even like his music during this time, or did you think it was better back during his first run of popularity, back in the olden days? Sound off in the comments, leave me your takes, I'd love to hear them. If you like this video, please strum the thumb, up picking or down picking, any which way, it's okay. Make sure to subscribe if you'd like to come back. Thank you for coming back if you're already subscribed. Always a pleasure. Thank you for coming out. And I'll see you at the next gig.